What have we learned so far in college football this year? Everyone thought they knew some stuff in spring and summer, preview magazine season, etc. Then the week 1 results come in, and now we've got week 2 results in. And I'm going to give you things that I think I figured out so far. One thing I've learned is Clemson is still in every conversation they were always in. So once upon a time, Clemson was the favorite or co-favorite to win the ACC. Then they get just smoked by Georgia in week 1, like a lot of folks will end up having happen to them this week. And some folks, including me, got a little doubtful about Clemson. But it wasn't my fault. The model started to sell its Clemson stock as well. And then Clemson annihilates a pretty good App State team. And now they're right back. JP Poll's got them right back where they were rated in the preseason. They are the number 2 odds team to win the ACC. They haven't played a conference game. They don't play Miami in the regular season. So if you thought Clemson was an ACC title contender, which means they're a playoff contender, what's changed? What's changed? They certainly rid themselves and rid everyone of that memory, that ugly week 1 memory, and now they are about to dive into conference play. And like I said, they don't play Miami. They go to Florida State in a couple of weeks. But outside that Louisville game at home, at Virginia Tech later in the year, there's still a lot that remains to be decided in the ACC. So Clemson, I've learned, although I thought I wouldn't have, I've relearned, they're still eligible and they're still capable of doing everything I thought they'd do. I've learned, unfortunately, it's not going to happen for Colorado. Just don't think it's going to happen for the Buffs this year. And by it, I mean being a surprise contender to win the Big 12. They played Nebraska last week. It's not a conference game, but what happened in the Nebraska game is going to be rinse and repeated a few times in Big 12 play. Big misconception about the Big 12 is it's a pinball conference. And it's not. It's a roll up your sleeves, run the football, play defense conference. It just doesn't have the elite top-end first-round NFL draft-type talent that you would find in the Big 12 or the Big 10 or the SEC. But those are really good third, fourth, fifth-year player-type programs, real culture programs. And so it's not an easy task. I don't care if you got Travis Hunter. I don't care if you got Shedeur, especially if you can't protect him. It's not an easy task to go into this conference and just, pop your knuckles. Hey, we're Colorado. Okay. Well, we're Kansas State. We're Arizona. We're Utah. We're Kansas. It's not going to be an easy road for Colorado. Next up, let's go out west here for a second. I think I've learned Oregon is not Oregon yet. I say that because we've watched them play the entire state of Idaho through the first couple of weeks. They struggled against Idaho, period. They struggled against Boise State last week, needed a walk-off field goal to beat the Broncos. And it may be that they were a little overrated early in the season, but the difference is, unlike some of these teams that just were rated too high, I think Oregon may have been rated too soon. I'm not selling on Oregon. I think Oregon's one of those teams, we see it every year, that is going to eventually blossom into the version of themselves that many of us thought they would be in the preseason. They just weren't ready to go yet. They were not ready to go. Sometimes week 1 arrives way too early for teams. Now, unfortunately, some of them get clipped and they get upset and then they're out of contention for stuff. Oregon has not lost. They're going to go to Oregon State this week. Then they start conference play the next week. Oregon, I think, at some point this year will be fine. Fortunately for them, their schedule was not front-loaded. They play Ohio State, but they didn't play them early. They go to Michigan, but they don't do it early. They go to Wisconsin. They do that way later in the season. So they've got time to work it out. Now, in your subconscious, you kind of know that. And sometimes it can lead to, again, subconsciously not having a sense of urgency about yourself. Now, if Dan Lanning were on the show, which he's been many times, he would swear, no, there's urgency. We preach urgency no matter what the schedule is. I know he does. That's why I said subconsciously. You can't help but know you're going to be favored by a lot the first few weeks of the season. And even if Lanning himself doesn't fall victim to that, sometimes your players can. So still mixing and matching on the offensive line. I think they'll get things figured out. I think Oregon will still be a Big Ten and national championship contending type team. They just are not that yet. But that's okay. You're not everything that you're going to be in week 2 and week 3. But as much as Oregon doesn't look like a national title contender, I've learned Tennessee's a national title contender. I went beyond SEC there. I went beyond just playoff. See, there's this tiered language that we use these days with an expanded playoff. And if you say someone's a playoff contender, that's a fancy way of saying they can make it, but they can't win it. Now, Tennessee playing the kind of defense they're playing now, combined with just Josh Heupel, anytime he's got elite talent at quarterback, they can win it. They are a definite team in the mix along with your Georgias and your Bamas and your Texases, Ohio States. They can win this thing. The difference is you will blindly buy into the notion that all the other ones will. I've got a solid portion of our audience, I go back and forth with you guys all the time, who believe Tennessee just flat out can't do this anymore. I think it's just because of recency bias and you haven't seen them. If you're a 20-year-old viewer of the show, you haven't lived in a world where Tennessee's a national title contender. Well, you have now, because they are again. Just because they haven't in your lifetime doesn't mean they won't in your lifetime, maybe as soon as this year. So what did we always say? I'm going to talk about USC in a little while, but what have we always said with these coaches like Heupel? Man, if they can ever pair a pretty good to elite defense with what they do offensively, woo! Now, normally it doesn't happen because normally, stylistically, DNA-wise, you got to give something up to get something, but Tennessee's figured something out, and that travels. You know, they'll go to Oklahoma in a couple of weeks. Eventually, they'll go to Georgia. They didn't have a shot against Georgia last time they went down there. They'll have a shot now. They will have a shot because they got things that travel. Next, unfortunate again, we're kind of trying to go up and down with positive, negative. I have learned that this was not a reloading year for Florida State. This was a resetting year. Notice I didn't say rebuild. I think it's a reset kind of year. It's not as simple to me down there as, well, we'll get them next year. Now, they still got 10 games to play, so they shouldn't be thinking about next year at all. But I'm thinking about next year because I have punted on the season for Florida State. So I'm capable of doing that. But I'm thinking it's not as easy as let's dip into the portal and let's reload for next year. I'm thinking let's reassess how we run this program and how we build this roster. Now, I said that the other day, and folks said, well, Norvell's been there, 4 or 5 years at this point. You can't do that. Well, of course you can. Anytime you realize the right thing to do, you do that right thing. I don't care if you're 2 years in or 10 years in. If you think that you have gone about building your roster the wrong way, then you immediately make moves to rectify that. And at Florida State, that just means recruiting high school talent a whole lot better and more effectively than they have, and making moves on your staff however you need to in order to accomplish that goal. That's the long and short of it. So however they have to go about that, they got to go about that. This year, I think the one positive is it's been such a glaring slap in the face. It's been such a glaring shock to the senses. There can be no room for confusion down there about what the problem is. I don't think Mike Norvell ever wants to live through another year where he's got to go through summer and then fall camp and look at all this talent in front of him, but chew his fingernails down to the nubs wondering, I got a bunch of individuals. Do I have a team, though? Because he found out the hard way, and he's not alone, but we're talking about Florida State. Florida State has found out the hard way. Stacking a bunch of really good individuals does not always equal a team. And it's no guarantee that you'll have great teams even if you build through high school. But, man, you will have guys who have been immersed in your system and your culture, and, you know, folks who don't worry about things like doing away with the war chant on third down, folks who don't worry about their draft stock on third down. They're just worried about, you know, what they can do for Florida State as opposed to simply what can Florida State do for them. Sheet of paper gets flipped over. Hey, staying in the Sunshine State here for a second. I personally, don't know about you guys, I've learned the evidence was not lying to us about Miami. The evidence was there that this was going to be a really, really good team. Many people were unwilling to buy into it because of whatever your preconceived notion is about Miami or Mario Cristobal. I hear the same stuff about Tennessee. I hear the same stuff about USC. It's just because they haven't been something in a while, automatically there's this layer of doubt that's not baked in for other programs, which is fine. But when you looked at what they had done, when you looked at the moves they had made, not the least among them getting Cam Ward, all the evidence was there to believe that this team was capable of winning the ACC and then some. And then they go and do what they did in week 1 against Florida. Now, if you were already a doubter of Miami, I don't know why you would have backed off the ledge at this point. All you got to do is say, well, of course they beat Florida. A bunch of folks will beat Florida this year. So if I was a doubter of Miami coming into the season, I'd still be a doubter. I wasn't a doubter. I picked them to win the conference. I picked them to have a first-round bye in the playoffs. So I've seen everything to affirm what I already believed, but now they're going to go through a schedule here where they will not be on national radars a whole lot. That Virginia Tech game in a few weeks lost a bunch of its luster because Virginia Tech lost to Vanderbilt. They go to Louisville October 19th, which I think is one of the games of the year in that conference. But is America really going to focus its sights on Louisville, Kentucky for an ACC game? I don't know that they will. And so you'll start to hear about them down the stretch when the playoff rankings are coming out and when FanDuel is continuously updating those ACC championship odds. But Miami does not have those 2 or 3 marquee games left on the schedule like we talk about with Tennessee or like we even talk about with USC. So it's still going to have to be a little bit of blind belief, because if you still don't believe in Miami, there is not that one game coming up in the regular season where they can prove themselves to you. I think we just came back from Ann Arbor last week. I think that last year didn't really matter. Last year doesn't matter with Michigan. It was never going to matter. What did you hear a lot of times, even last week when folks were talking about this Texas-Michigan game, if someone picked Michigan? You heard a lot of things that really didn't matter. Things like, you're going to go in there against the defending national champ? Well, no, you're not. The trophy doesn't play football. The trophy's in the trophy case where trophies live. And a lot of those pieces are gone, and a lot of those coaches are gone. And so this year's team was going to have to stand on its merits. You don't ever defend a championship. It's not pro wrestling. You don't walk out the tunnel with the strap over your shoulder. This year's team is on display. This year's team's not nearly as good as last year's team. That is not revelatory by any stretch if you understood what was on last year's team and what is on this year's team. But there was, I guess, this hype bubble that still needed to be popped a little bit. So now it's been popped. So now you can get to work. We are talking, and as you and I are talking, they're getting ready to play Arkansas State. I happen to think Michigan will have a really good week this week. And you may say, well, so what? It's Arkansas State. They got USC coming up, first off. They got 10 more games coming up. You know, there's a big difference in Michigan's not going to compete for the Big Ten championship and Michigan's going to go 6-6. Just because you don't compete for the Big Ten championship, you put an 8 or a 9 win season up, it's still pretty good, all things considered. Not up to the standard they want to meet, but all things considered, it could be a whole lot worse. Well, you need to take care of business against teams like Arkansas State. I'm strangely, just morbidly interested to see that Arkansas State game. Next up, oh boy, so we didn't plan it this way, but it makes sense. I think folks are still misunderstanding Texas. Now, part one of the misunderstanding that quickly got rectified was Texas is a finesse fireworks type team, and you know they'll go in there and they'll face a really, really physical team like Michigan, edge Michigan if it turns into a street fight. Well, clearly that wasn't the case. Clearly Texas went in there, wanted a fight, started the fight, dominated the fight, and then ended the fight on their terms. Now, here's the next big misconception you need to correct in your mind if you're still thinking it. I have heard this week a lot of people talking about how good Sark's used the portal and how much the portal has sort of quasi-built this Texas team into a contender. The portal hasn't built Texas into a contender. High school recruiting has. And if you want to go back and watch that game against Michigan, go look at what the Texas offensive line did. And then I want you to check where every one of those starting 5 came from. Because their last stop before they were in Austin was high school. They built that thing entirely through high school. Don't misunderstand me. They have done a great job leveraging the portal. They have gone to the portal to backfill at receiver, for example. I'm not denying that. Tight end as well with Nyblack. I'm not denying that. But the nucleus of this team is not its wide receiver core. I think one of the big differences with the way this Texas team is built and the way that previous Ohio State teams were built is we talked about those Ohio State receivers the last few years as well. When it came time to win fights, when it came time to win games on the line of scrimmage, to get off the field on third down, to put together a sustained drive, to close out one game, ironically against Michigan, those Ohio State teams couldn't do it. This Texas team is capable of it because their identity is just a little bit different than those previous Ohio State teams. I still don't think everyone understands that about them. But they'll learn. Easy way or hard way, they'll learn. Next up, this was sort of sad, so that was happy. This is sort of sad. Notre Dame, I have learned, is not ready to be a primetime program yet. I didn't say Notre Dame sucked. They don't. There's a lot of rungs on the ladder of college football. Everyone wants to either be the top or the bottom. They want to classify teams as great or terrible. Notre Dame is not terrible. They're not great. They're closer to great than terrible. They're probably somewhere around pretty good to really good. And then there are several rungs still above that, great, elite, etc. They are not in those categories yet. And after week 1, they went into Texas A&M and won. I think a lot of folks thought maybe they had taken that next step, but most importantly and most unfortunately, I think they believed inside the walls of that program that they had taken that next step. And they believed it so much that they really didn't prepare the next week the way that they had prepared. It was like they had prepared for a one-game season. It's like they had prepared for a Super Bowl, went and won the Super Bowl, and then someone called them and said, "No, you guys got 11 more to play." What? Oh, well, good. It's just Northern Illinois. Nope, not the way it works. You don't have those caliber athletes. You can't afford to do that even if you do have that. But you especially can't. I mean, you got outgained by 100 yards by Northern Illinois. This is multiple times now as a double-digit favorite, multiple times against unranked teams that Marcus Freeman has lost. I don't think the guy's a bad coach. He's still a very young coach, relatively speaking. The question is not that in my mind. My question is, have they gotten to certain points yet? And they haven't gotten to that point yet. They're not ready to be that kind of program yet. It's not the craziest concept that a second or third, what is he, 21, 2, 3, a fourth-year head coach, I think that's where Marcus Freeman is. It's not the craziest concept in the world that he wouldn't be there yet. But we've seen guys get there. Kirby Smart, year 2, had Georgia in a national championship game. So we've had varying degrees of immediate to fairly immediate success. That's not quite Marcus Freeman yet. Maybe it never will be, or maybe it will be and it just takes 5 or 6 years. And lastly, as far as the things I've learned this year, I have learned that USC, to me, is the story of the year in college football so far. Lincoln Riley forever has been one of the very best play callers and offensive coordinator types in this sport. He happens to be a head coach, but he is also his offensive coordinator, essentially. He's been that for a long time. Every quarterback is a Heisman Trophy contender, rewrote offensive record books at Oklahoma, had him as a double-digit winner every year, goes to USC. Everyone thinks this is going to be an immediate explosion, and it's not, because he improperly hired or imported defensive staffers, and that dug him a little bit of a hole. And to his credit, he tried to correct not only with better hires, but also a philosophy and program shift in the spring last year, or this year, and it's worked. That's the story. It's worked. A lot of guys have tried to change things about themselves before, but see, the thing about changing yourself is it's really hard to do, because you are yourself. You are what you are. You've got to be willing to change what you are. It's not window dressing. You can't just say a bunch of stuff in a microphone and say things like, we're going to be a defensive-oriented team. You're Lincoln Riley. No, you're not. Well, he meant it. He meant it. Credit to him for not just making the hire, but he made the hires, plural, and it's so noticeable. Overnight, it's noticeable, which means they weren't totally void of defensive talent. I've been surprised by it. Like, I thought Lynn coming over from UCLA is one thing, and that staff being massively upgraded is one thing, but you can only do, as a chef, what your ingredients give you the capability to do. And even the best chefs would tell you that. Clearly, I roll in the highest of culinary circles. You know what? Southern Cal fans, to their credit, I got to talk to my friends over on the Peristyle. You guys knew your team. Maybe there were some better ingredients in the kitchen than we knew. And Alex Grinch he's just playing play school in there. I think Southern Cal is the story of the year. Now, the year is 2 weeks old, and so we're going into week 3. Are they off, Jesse? They got a bye week? Oh, you can't talk to me. That's right. IFB problems. They are going to Michigan next week. Now, I don't need to sell you on that game. I think you already understand ramifications for both sides, but that's why that Arkansas State-Michigan game is very important to me this week, too. I think USC is the story of the year in college football so far.